Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy Beans, and welcome back to another exciting and honestly heartfelt episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast. I'm your host, Luke the Human. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good, and all that jazz. Before we get into today's topic, I want to do a bit of housekeeping because I like to keep my house nice and clean. So make sure that you follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. If you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And finally, if you listen to this on Spotify on your mobile phone, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating. If you can do all three of those things at the very, very beginning, I will be eternally grateful. So today we're going to be looking at Valiant Hearts, The Great War from 2014 by Ubisoft Studios Montpellier. This is part of my £5 bargain or bin game review series. For anybody who is new to the podcast and new to this series, the long and short of it is that I get games that are £5 or less. I get them when they're on sale on the Xbox store, or if I find them at a car boot, or if I find them at a retro game store. I find these games and I just try to understand if they are worth the bargain, if they are worth the price of £5 entry or less, or have I found a game that is actually worth hardly anything that and it should be thrown in the bin. And that's the idea and concept behind it. The only real rules that I have for this series is that it has to be £5 or less. It can't be £5.50, it can't be £5.99, and it can't be £5 1p. It has to be from £4.99 all the way down to basically free. That is the only criteria that I have. So far, I've looked at so many wonderful games like Kingdom Hearts 3. I've also looked at the DuckTales remaster games, Escape from Dead Island. So they're all there if you want to check them out. As for today, though, we're going to be looking at Valiant Hearts, The Great War. I'm really, really excited for this one. I haven't played it since the original Xbox 360 days, and I never completed it. But from what I remember enjoying it. I remember it being full of history, being full of heartfelt music, and the story was incredible. The characters were really incredible. I remember the puzzle sections that kind of slowed the game down, but it was done in such a way where it was meaningful and it was poignant. And I just remember having so much fun and love of this game. I'm currently playing the next gen version from the Xbox One. So it might look a little bit prettier than the original, but the game, it's one of those, because the art style, it doesn't matter if I'm playing it on new generation anyway, because its art style is so unique. It's one of them games that will forever just stand the test of time and always look beautiful and gorgeous. And it does, even in next gen. I'm playing it on the Xbox Series X, and it looks and feels gorgeous. And it always will do. So I'm really excited to talk about it today. As for the game's plot. So, the story begins in the year 1914. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in defense of Serbia. Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary's allies, Germany, declares war on Russia in response. Anticipating war, France, who is allied with Russia at the time, begins deporting German citizens. Karl, one of the deported Germans, is separated from his wife Marie and their son Victor and drafted into the German army. Likewise, Marie's father and Karl's father-in-law, Emil, is drafted into the French army. After completing his training, Emil is thrown into combat during the Battle of the Frontiers. His unit is wiped out and he is wounded. He is captured and forced to cook for the Germans. His captor is Baron von Doth, who uses many advanced weapons like chlorine gas and zeppelins to defeat his foes. Karl recognizes Emil while serving under von Doth, but the Allies attack von Doth's camp and Karl is forced to flee. After he is rescued from the rubble by Walt, a German army medical dog, Emil escapes in the confusion and meets Freddy, an American who volunteered to join the French army after his wife was killed in a German bombing raid led by von Doth. So that is the story. As for the development, so there's a lot to talk about here. For anybody who is unaware, I am a huge history buff. I absolutely love history. My speciality, the sort of part of history that I enjoy the most and read the most about, is World War I and II. So I have a big love for this time period and what happened during this time. I've had family members. My dad's dad. He served in the Second World War. My granddad, my mum's dad, he was a military police in Warwickshire during the Second World War. So I've had family that have served in the past during those times, and I've got family currently that are serving. So it's all very much very ingrained in my family, to be honest, this sort of thing. So I've always had such a love and a passion for the time period. But as for the development of the game, it's very, very fascinating. There's a lot to talk about, so you're going to have to bear with me. But here it goes. So, artist Paul Tremblay began working on Valiant Hearts, The Great War, as a solo project in 2011. Additional team members from Ubisoft Montpellier, including directors Jan France and Simon Chicobutani, if I butchered them, I do apologise, joined the work on the gameplay and the story a half year later. As 2014 was the century of World War One, the team wanted to create a game grounded in history. The title was intended to help players remember the war and to suggest the game is also about love. According to the team, the incidents from World War One touched them because their great-grandparents had been involved in the war, like mine had. Initially, the developers put equal emphasis on both the storyline and its gameplay, but the gameplay became secondary to the story. The team believed that portraying World War One as a shooter would have made it too violent, and the game would have needed a narrative with a villain and had to depict one of the belligerents as evil. Instead, the team tried to create a game about the trials and tribulations of both sides during the war, showing how individuals live their lives and struggle to survive. The game does not allow the characters to be actively killed by any other in-game characters. The developers hoped to show the human side of the war and feared that allowing players to kill would muddy the message they wanted to convey. The game introduces 4 characters and the story switches between them. This enabled the team to create an emotional story with better pacing and ensures that each story beat ends with a cliffhanger. While the story began with some light-hearted moments, the tone of the story became progressively darker and solemn as the war wages on. The team did not want players to feel overpowered and designed the title as a slow-paced puzzle video game which does not involve much violence. Gameplay mechanics are simple so the game is accessible, but the team introduced different contexts for the use of the gameplay mechanics to ensure they would not become stale. The walking pace of characters was slow to illustrate they are ordinary human beings. According to the team, the presence of these slow puzzle-solving segments helped make the rare action sequences more powerful, as none of the creative leads had experience working on the puzzle game. The team looked at design documents from old LucasArts adventure games for inspiration. They were also inspired by titles including The Cave, Machinarium, and Limbo. To ensure the game was historically accurate, the development team listened to first-hand accounts of the war from team members' families, read letters written by soldiers, travelled to the trenches in France, and the information and stories they collected were then incorporated into the title as collectibles to let players gain new knowledge about the war. Ubisoft also partnered with the producers of the documentary film Apocalypse World War One to incorporate archived materials into the game. However, the game's cast of protagonists is not based on any historical figure, as the team did not want to cross the line between reality and fiction. To create an immersive soundscape, the audio team inspected archived documents from the French Foreign Legion, and the development team recorded themselves making various screaming sounds. The game is powered by Ubisoft's UbiArt Framework game engine, which was used previously in smaller Ubisoft titles, including Child of the Light and Montpellier's own Rayman Legends. The team opted to use a cartoonish visual, as they believe that this art style helped them to retain respect for the people who went through the war, while also making it accessible. Speech bubbles serve as the main way of showing conversations between characters, since they help to convey a complicated story in a simple manner. Another reason for their use was to avoid having to deal with different languages. The game's cutscenes are similar to a comic book, showing the player something happening far away from the characters using comic viewpoints. So that is to kind of give you a idea of the development. I love this game. Even though I never completed it, I loved it. And one of the reasons I loved it so much was the history. Um, my experience of playing the game so far just proves that. I'm about an hour or so in. It's not a long game. It feels longer because of the slow pace. It's not a long game, but this is one of those games that you don't rush through anyway. I'm literally trying my best to take my time. Every time I can, I'm stopping, I'm looking around. Even though it's on a 2D sort of scale, I'm enjoying the scenery. I'm trying to take in the emotions. I'm trying to take in the music. I'm trying to take everything visually in that is being thrown at me. And there's collectibles in this story that, as you find these collectibles, they give you a little bit of backstory about sort of different things that were used during the war, things that I didn't even know about. There are even historical accounts, so that the game will tell you in the corner, oh, brand new historical accounts have been unlocked. And there are usually about 4 to 5 of them. And like you have a picture, and it will just give you, like, beat for beat, just different bits of information about certain points in the period of the First World War that is given to the player thanks to Ubisoft coming together and working with the people who made the sort of documentary Apocalypse World War One. It's so incredible, so in depth that I'm playing the level, and then I'll stop playing and I'll start reading these long form sort of pieces of just knowledge and information about the First World War. And it's so fascinating. There are things that I didn't even know myself that were happening in the First World War that just blew me away. And I'll talk more about them, and I'll try and get some specific ones, and I'll read them out when I get around to doing that actual review. Because generally, I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Wow, I didn't know this," and I'm just letting it sink in. And this whole game, my experience so far is just been a one hell of an experience. It's been emotional. It's been I wouldn't say sad yet because I haven't got that far in. I'm sure it would get sad, but there are many moments where I'm just like, I love history, and I'm fascinated with the events of the First and Second World War, and just to kind of be able to not just experience it in a new way that's not Call of Duty or Medal of Honor, that's not guns blazes, to be able to experience it on a human level, on a human story, that you don't kill anybody. There's already enough killing going on around you. Why add to that? You know what I mean? And that's so different because most games you go, oh, First World War or any sort of battle, give you a gun, that sort of thing. And again, that's fine. You know, again, I've played loads of games like that. We all have, I'm sure. But to be given a different way of playing, to be able to be like, no, we're not going to give you a gun. You are not going to add to any more death. If anything, you are just trying to survive. You are playing a human story, really. And then you get those moments of where you get diary entries by the characters, and you're reading these diary entries, and you're starting to understand, and you're starting to connect to the characters a lot more. And then how a lot of these bits of collectibles that you can find, some of them are just like basic information. Others are actual real life letters from people from the Ubisoft studios or their grandparents and things like that. These are real letters by real people. And when you realize that these letters are written by real people at the time, it just makes it ever so more heartfelt. And I love this game for that. And yeah, it's so far my experience has been one of joy and just it's just I'm just I don't know how to get my words out. I am just so full of this feeling of like overwhelmed. Just I'm so glad I'm playing a game that like this. That there are games like this. That there are developers who want to tell stories this way. That it's not all just Call of Duty. That you can use this time period and tell a different story. You know, so yeah, my experience is fantastic so far, and I have no doubt that my experience all the way to the end will be even better. But we'll find out in a minute when I talk about my first impressions and my thoughts and feelings on the gameplay. But for you, that'll be in a couple seconds. For me, that might be a few days or weeks. It depends how long it takes me to complete it. So all I'm going to say is, lucky you. You get to see my thoughts and feelings now. Sit back, relax, maybe bring some tissues because it might be a heartfelt one. And I'll catch you all in a minute. Allons-y. And we're back. So, I've just finished Valiant Hearts, and my first sort of impressions are this game is absolutely beautiful. It is gorgeous. It is heartfelt. It's gripping. I know people say this all the time that video games are art, and they are art. But sometimes you get these games that are not video games, that they're experiences, that they are true life stories and events, and they are just every single thing about them is just poetry on screen. And that's what Valiant's Heart is. It's telling a story about a few people during the events of the First World War, from the very beginning till the end, almost to the end of the First World War, and how it affects the people, really, how it affects certain people, those that are on the French side, those that are on the German side, the different battles, the Battle of Vimy Hill, the Battle of the Somme, trench warfare, what that's like, everything about this game. To be honest, I generally underestimated this game. I thought, oh, I'll play it, I'll get it done within a week. It's not until I started playing it again and I realized how much substance and how much is to this game that it would be a disservice to rush through it. I'd be doing a disservice not only to myself and my own enjoyment, but to the people and those who fought in the First World War, their struggles, their experiences, everything that they went through, everybody who was impacted by the First World War and even the Second World War. So I didn't want to do a disservice. This was a game where I thought, you know what, I'm going to take it slow. And I did. It was like being at a museum. Instead of rushing through, going, that's nice, I sat and I read everything the game threw at me. I read. There are historical facts that the game tells you that you can sit and read, and it gives you beat for beat long form sort of essays on like the Battle of the Somme, for example, and the experience that soldiers had there. Or you can get collectibles, and each collectible, some of them are just for example, it explains how the helmets that the English used was also used by the Allies. So you got the Canadians, I think the Americans used them as well, the real sort of dish hat that we wear. It explains why they were used and who used them, and it was really, really, really fascinating. And there were many moments where I would just stop playing because I was listening to the music. Listening to the music and taking in all of the knowledge and everything that's being thrown at me. There was many moments where I was just in awe, where like I just wanted just to not play, to take it all in, to listen to the sights, listen to the sounds, and just breathe in the experience to some extent of what life was like during World War One in the trenches. It is just beautiful. This whole game is just one giant art piece. And as I mentioned in the introduction, it is slow, but it's intentionally slow. Like the character doesn't run because, well, in all fairness, it's you're not meant to run. If you run through, you're going to miss things. You're going to miss what's going on in the background. You're going to miss what's going on in front of you. So you take your time. And it just shows how drawn out the war was, how slow the war was, how many people during the First World War thought, oh, this will be over in a couple of days, a couple of weeks. And then you had like, I think it was the, was it the Battle of Vimy Hill? I think, or Bimini Ridge. I think that one was only meant to last a few days. That went on for a good year or two. I think it was that or the Battle of the Somme. Either way, these battles, none of them thought they were going to last any more than a few days. And a lot of them went on towards near to the end of the war, really. And it goes to show really the fact of a lot of time and effort went into this. And I was just floored. I really, really was. And honestly, my first impressions right at the gate is just play it. If you haven't experienced this game, you're doing yourself a disservice. You've got to give it a go. It is gorgeous. It is wonderful. Yes, it is slow paced, but it's intentionally slow. And just on the historical sort of fact of its own is merits to be bought. And then you add on the art style, then you add on the beauty, then you add on the characters and everything that goes on into it, and even the puzzles. you add everything to it, and it's just one of those where it is just a beautiful, wonderful experience, and not one you want to rush. One you want to generally take your time with, and read everything and see everything and immerse yourself in this experience. So for that alone, sells it for me, and hopefully should sell it for you. As for my thoughts on the story and the gameplay, we'll start off with the story. So the story revolves around a few characters. So you have Emile, a French farmer who, after being drafted into the French army, becomes a POW, prisoner of war. After being saved by Freddy, begins to search for his son-in-law, Carl. You have character Freddy, an American volunteer fighting in the war to avenge his fallen wife after Varen von Doff's regiment had killed her in a bombing. Then you have Anna, a Belgian nurse searching for her father after being kidnapped by Baron von Dorf. Then you have Carl, a German who married to Emile's daughter Marie. And then you have Walt, a Doberman dog, a German medic's dog who interacts with each of the characters during their adventures. So it's set up into 4 chapters, the story is, and each chapter revolves around a different year of the war, a different period of the war. And this is where the heartfelt comes in, because the characters don't talk. There's not really many, like they do, but it's not full on like dialogue. It is just small words here and there. And obviously I did French in school, so when Emile talks, I recognize the bit of French. When Freddie talks being American, he uses American, obviously. And there were a few moments where I sort of understood, but even without that, even without having my sort of French sort of degree from school and recognizing a few of the words, it didn't really matter, because even if there was no words at all, the music and the tone and what was going on in the background, I think that was just visual, told the story enough of how you should feel, how you should really experience what's going on as well. And you follow these characters as the story goes on, and you learn more about them and the struggles are really of war, because the best way to explain it, these characters are the characters you play as, but they're integral, but they're not, because it's not just their story. It's the story of the First World War. It's the story of every soldier. It's the story of every body who was affected, whether it be on the Allied side or it be on the German side, or it be the civilians getting caught up in the crossfire. Because there's moments in this game where it explains about the first use of mustard gas, the Germans were first to use chemical warfare, and it explains that, and it shows that it wasn't just, they didn't just use it on the trenches, they bombed cities with these gas and killing civilians and killing soldiers as well, and how people survived that, and how gas masks became a standard feature. And if you couldn't get a gas mask, you had to, and it sounds crude, but it worked, you had to pee on a rag, and you tie the rag around your face, because the urine in the pee would counteract and lessen the effect of the the citric acid, really, burning your lungs, really, and killing you. So these things, and you learn these things in war, and as the story goes on, you learn how brutal it is, and the characters change, and the things that they go through. Like Emile, he's already an old man when he gets drafted into the French army. He gets drafted into it, and his story as it goes on, and I don't want to spoil it, but he gets less and less hopeful, and he loses his joyousness he does in the first. He loses that spring in his step, to the point by the end, his final sort of battle, shall we say, the final sort of chapter with him in, he ends up doing something that is completely out of character for him. But the war has led him that far on his path that he can't help not have done what he did. He, in his mind, felt like what he was doing was right. And what he did was actually what a lot of soldiers did at that time in the French army. But I can't really mention it because it is a spoiler, and I don't want to ruin it. It is a sort of surprise sort of revelation what happens in the story. But if you know what happens with the French army at a certain battle, one of the bloodiest battles between the French and the Germans that ever took place in the First World War, if you know that battle, and you can probably realise what happened. If not, I don't want to ruin it. I'd say play the game to find out. But again, it's that evolution of the character, and it's not just that. You have like Freddy as well. He was living in Paris with his wife. Paris got bombed. His wife died, so he joined up with the army. And he fought, and his character changes, and his main goal is to take down Baron von Doff, who is the man that dropped the bomb. So he's got a vendetta against him. You have Karl, who gets drafted into the German army, and because obviously he was a German citizen, so now he's on the enemy side, but he doesn't want to fight. He wants to get back to Marie, Emil's daughter, because they've got a son on the way, and he wants to be there for his son. So he's trying his best to not fight. He's trying his best to get out, and he escapes a POW camp, and his story goes on, and you meet Anna and her experience trying to find her dad, and they cross paths with each other as they go through, and you meet Walt the dog, and obviously Walt, he saves you and use Walt to help you solve puzzles and save other people. And it is really heartfelt. The characters, without saying any words, you feel for every single character. So the point of when one thing happens at the very end with a certain character, it got me. I literally put the controller down and I sat there, sort of think of style, just watching the screen, being like, I can't believe what I'm about to see. Like any moment, I think something's going to happen, like it's going to change, but it didn't. And it was heartfelt and it was heartbreaking. You really, without using any words, from the use of just the scenery and the music and the events of what's going on, especially with me being a history buff as well. And I know of how bloody these battles were and how bad these battles were. Me having that connection to it, there's moments where I just sat there and went, oh my God. I was just floored. And that kind of brings into the gameplay as well. Like I said, the characters don't run. You have puzzles, you have things to solve, and the puzzles aren't difficult. The puzzles are a mix between relatively easy and a little bit sort of not difficult, but a little bit sort of boring. Well, no, boring's the wrong word. I'm trying to think of a word that I should use. Tedious. Yeah, tedious is the better word. Very fun. And not very difficult, but also it can be quite tedious as you get to close to the end of the game. And a lot of these puzzles feels like I don't know if it's padding or what, but the sort of end sort of puzzles felt a bit sort of tedious. But even so, like I said, you're meant to experience it. If the characters could run and you could run through a lot of these things and you could run through a lot of these puzzles, then you wouldn't have the time to connect with the characters. You wouldn't have the time to connect with the events, and you would, like I said, doing yourself a disservice because you wouldn't have spent time learning about what was going on. And I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but obviously with the historical facts and the collectibles, and if you take your time to read a lot of the stuff that the game gives you to read, you quickly learn what is going on really, and what's happening during the Second World War, and it's very, very, very important time in history. Of kind of, it's that idea of that if we don't learn about it, we're doomed to repeat it. And that's what kept going in my mind, was the fact of I can't believe this happened. It did happen. We should be working as best as we can to make sure this doesn't happen again. Obviously, it did happen again with the Second World War, sadly, but let's hope that we never get another one. Because as Albert Einstein says, he goes, I don't know what the World War III weapons will be fought in World War III, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones, because we just bomb ourselves to hell. And again, without getting too sort of dark, but yeah, you know what I mean? So it's that idea of wanting to learn. But the art style as well, before I get into the historical part of it, the art style is gorgeous as well. It's done so beautifully. It's like art. It is many moments you can pause the game and you're like, that's the trailer, that's the background, that's the screensaver. It's the art style. It's a cartoony sort of way, and what I love is the fact of, because they have this cartoony style, that even though what you're seeing is quite brutal, it could be seen a lot worse and a lot more sort of more brutal than it was. If they decided to go with like Unreal Engine sort of graphics, or they decided to make it a little bit more brutal and visceral, I feel like it would have changed the tone completely. Whereas with this, it's very much it's still heartfelt and it's still brutal and it's still sort of heartbreaking, but it's done in such a way where not desensitizes, it just kind of makes it a lot more sort of approachable, a lot easier digestible for a gaming audience to kind of taking what they're seeing and be able to digest what they're seeing, but not being too sort of pushed away or not being too traumatized or not having that feeling of like, oh, the game's too much, it's too full on, I can't do it. Whereas with the art style, because it's done in such in a certain tone, in such a certain way, that you can watch it, you can play it, and you can still feel heartfelt, you can still get everything and all the emotions, but not be put off. You can be drawn in. So I really love it for that. As for sort of the historical facts and the collectibles, this was my favorite part of it, because you had war facts. For example, and I'm gonna sort of read off a few. So you have like the war is declared. So June the 28th, 1914, Archduke Ferdinand, heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo as a result of the chain of diplomatic and military alliances in place. The event launched Europe into an armed conflict that, with the involvement of colonies, took on a global dimension. August the 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. August the 3rd, Germany declared a war on France. August the 5th, Britain declared war on Germany. August the 11th and 12th, France and Britain declared war on Austria-Hungary. And then it goes on to talk about things like the barracks and the regiment. So battalions comprised of a battalion headquarters and 4 companies, a total of 1,007 men in all. Companies were composed of 4 platoons, in turn divided into 4 sections, each of 12 men commanded by an NCO. Britain was slow to mobilise on the Western Front. Half its army was overseas, and with a genuine fear of invasion, infantry divisions were held in reserve in Britain and not included in the British expeditionary force, while conscription only came into force in 1916. Voluntary enlistment was initially overwhelming, with 750,000 men eager to show their patriotism. And then you get ones like Americans in the French army. So 128 Americans enrolled in the French army from the start of the conflict, mostly in Paris, including the poet Alan Seeger. The majority joined the Foreign Legion and took part in the Battle of Marne. Others joined the Air Force, which later became the Lafayette Squadron. 24 gave their lives for France, including Alan Seeger. The media attention they received in the United States plays a divisive role in their own country's decision to join the war 3 years later. Then you had the Battle of Marne. Drawn up long before the war, the von Scheffelin plan aimed at swiftly overrunning France via Belgium and northern France. After the August debacle, on September the 6th, French troops turned to face German troops in the divisive Battle of Marne and prevented the capture of Paris. The battle was the first time Franco-British forces managed to halt the German advance and thwart the main German battle plan. The front retreated northwards and stabilised in December, when trench warfare began in earnest. And then it just goes on, like, for example, letters remain the only real means of communication with the outside world. Radios and telephones were only used for military ends. Any soldiers wrote to their loved ones back home, as war correspondence was free of charge. This created logistical and financial problems. 10 billion letters and postcards were sent to and from the front during the war. The early war postal system was chaotic, but then the front was then separated into sectors, each with its own postcode. The visit from the military postmaster was eagerly awaited. Then you had like ones like the Battle of Neuchâtel. March the 10th, 1915, British shells literally rained down on German forces. For the first time, the technique creeping barrage was used, a barrage where the fire of all unit targets the same position for a period before advancing on one line at a time. The infantry advance was synchronized at a safe distance behind this barrage so that German lines could be overrun. That day, 530 cannons fired over 216,000 shells. That is to say, 1 shell per weapon every 2 minutes. And it just goes on. And these are just some of the interesting parts that I found while playing the game. There are more like this, and there are more in-depth ones like this. It goes into details about the first tanks that were used and where they were used and why they were used. And the collectibles do it as well. Like I said, I used the gas mask, for example. When people said, well, if they didn't have a gas mask, they would use a sheet with urine on it or something like that to cover their face and to cover their eyes as well, because it would just burn the skin. It would burn the face. So this was like a form of protection, really. If you couldn't get a gas mask, that's what you did. And other little things. And it went into talking about trench warfare and about how brutal the trench warfare was, because like they got to a point where, like, for example, the French army, they had tiny little shovels, and they weren't very good for digging out trenches. So what the French did was they just sharpened the shovel to one end, and then they would just go over the side, and they would just use it as a club. And there were tons more like this. They were like tons of medieval weapons and a lot of like makeshift sort of weapons that were being used. But where there was, what I loved so much about the First World War, and what fascinates me, where there is death and destruction, and where there is sadness and loss and just brutality, there is also humanity at the same stage. There is art, there is poetry, there is so much that just shows that the human side to war. Because the thing is, with most war, specifically the First World War, a lot of people didn't want to fight. It's the same with the Second World War. A lot of people didn't want to fight. A lot of people were just brought into it. They had to be there because they had to. They had no choice. It was conscription. So while a lot of people were in the trenches, while they were waiting, they created beautiful art. Old shells. They would get old munitions and bullets and shells, and they would make art, and they would write poetry. And there are some authors that came out of the First World War that survived, and they became poets, and they would write about their experience in the war, and they would talk about what it was like on the battlefield. And it gives a new dynamic to something that is full of death and destruction and sadness, and bring a beauty to it in a way, really. And this is what took me so long to really finish this game, is because I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to read every historical fact. I wanted to find every single collectible, which I did. It was about 200 in total. There was loads. Find every collectible, read everything they had to say, because there were things in this that I didn't know. I learned so much, more than I thought I knew. A lot about the First World War, but there was so much that I didn't know. And it just absolutely fascinating me. Like, for example, 6 million prisoners of war. So between 1914 to 1918, over 6 million men were taken prisoner, including 1.2 million Germans, 200,000 British troops. Despite the 1907 Hague Convention and the efforts of the International Red Cross, prison conditions and forced labor provided harsh for conscripts, and hundreds of thousands never made it home. So it was difficult on both sides, and there was just so much to go into, like the Gewolf rifles. In the early 20th century, Great Britain and France governed huge colonial empires and put them to use during the war. Indian troops were deployed by Britain in the Middle East as well as on the European front, and made an important contribution to the war effort. Many victories were achieved thanks to their bravery and discipline and in combat. A monument commemorating their sacrifice stands in Neuchâtel, France. And that's just one of many things. And that was a fact that I didn't know about the Gewolf rifles. And I just sat there and I was just like, I didn't know that. And it was just beautiful now that I know it. And that brings me on nicely to my overall sort of thoughts, is the fact of, if you are a history buff, and even if you're not, if you're a gamer, if you want to play a game that is slow, is heartfelt, it is beautiful, it tells a really interesting and compelling story, then this is the game for you. And another thing that I loved about this game is that some of the collectibles, you could find letters, and these letters were real letters from German soldiers, French soldiers, British soldiers, Canadian soldiers, Australian soldiers, Russian soldiers. You could find these letters, and it would be real letters where a lot of them were just saying, to their loved ones, to their dearest, being like, I don't want to be here, I hope you're well, I hope to be with you soon. I hope that the money that you're receiving money for me, because the way it worked in the army was that half your salary would go to your loved ones. So you'd get a percentage, and then the other percentage would go to your loved ones. And a lot of them would say, like, I hope you're getting some money and you're looking after yourselves. And it was just, it was those real, because you could tell they were real. You could tell that they were real people, that somebody had actually written these a long time ago, that they wasn't just written for the game. Like, you could tell that these were real heartfelt short letters, because again, they didn't have a lot of, because it was difficult to write a full piece of paper, like a whole sort of story. So like, it was a bit easy just to write what you needed to quickly. I'm well, hope you're all well. Thinking of you always, send all my love to the family, Charlie, or whatever. And it's those short, heartfelt stories that hit you the hardest, the most, because a lot of them were probably just kids, young kids, terrified, not knowing what they were getting themselves in for. And yeah, it's just incredible. There is a sequel, Coming Home, which came out, I think, 2022. So I do want to play that, and I'm going to get round to it, because this is a series that is just gorgeous, and to continue the story with these incredible characters, I definitely want to do. So my overall thoughts are, if you haven't experienced it, you've never played it, do yourself a favor, pick it up, give it a play. If you're a history buff, you'll love it. If you're a gamer and a history buff, you'll love it too. And if you're just a gamer, you'll enjoy it, because it is absolutely wonderful. And it's always on sale as well. So it's definitely one you can pick up on the cheap if you don't want to spend full price. But that brings me to, is it worth the £5 entry fee or not at all? This game is not only worth the £5 entry fee. I would happily pay full price for this. Hands down. I would happily spend full price. I think it's about 12, 14 quid full price. I'd happily spend that and more, just for the experience alone. Forget the gameplay itself, forget the gameplay, just for the experience, just for learning more about the First World War, to bring in light of the struggles of the First World War, not just the soldiers, but the people, the French people, the German people, everybody who had who was affected by the First World War, which almost everybody was, really. To that extent, just for that, it's worth it, the entry fee alone, just for the historical part of it, to representing that struggle and what people were going through. And then add on the gameplay, and add on the characters, and add on the music. And like I said, there were many moments where I just stopped playing. I would press pause on the game just to listen to the music. They had beautiful music at so many parts of the game. And like, when you read in the historical documents, the music would change and it would get a lot more softer and lighter. And I was just transported. I time traveled in my mind. And it's so, it does it so well. Like, I'm generally tongue tied, because I'm trying to think of other words than just incredible and amazing. I'm trying to think of other descriptive words, but currently my brain is scrambled, because I'm just so in awe of the experience, that it's just one of those games where I'm just like, I don't know what to say other than, you need to play it if you haven't. That is the be all end all. It is worth the entry fee. If you can get it on sale, wonderful. If you want to spend full price, you will be spending every money, and every penny will be worth it, because it is that incredible of an experience, that incredible of a time, that you'll be, again, doing yourself a disservice to not experience it. It is that good. Valiant Hearts is up there with one of the best historical sort of puzzle games I've ever played. It was just on another level. And I absolutely adored it. So, yeah, that is all I have to say. Thank you for joining me with this £5 bargain or bin episode. I hope you really liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. I do apologize if I went a bit deep there. It's just that this is a time period that I'm very fascinated on, and I find it so incredible and interesting and heartfelt. And to get a game that tells that story, to bring remembrance to it, to tell some stories and tell some facts that most people might not know, I very much appreciate, and I think you would too as well, when you get around to playing it. So thank you very much for listening to me. I don't know what was going to come next in this series, but to be honest, this will be the last one I do for the year. So I hope you liked it. Hope you enjoyed it. Next week, by the time this comes out, it will be December. So I'll be getting ready for my Christmas celebration. So I hope you want to stick around for that. If you do, and you want to know what I'm doing over Christmas, then by all means, you can follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. If you listen to this on Spotify, then by all means, please follow the podcast. Don't forget to give it a 5-star rating. And if you listen to this on YouTube, by all means, you can subscribe and like and comment and all that down below. Let me know what you thought about this game. Let me know, because you can leave comments now on Spotify. So leave a comment down below on Spotify, what you thought of my thoughts and feelings. If you played this game, same over on YouTube. Write down in the comments, give me some feedback. Let me know what you think if you played this game and all that. And yeah, so next time I see you, it'll be Christmas, it'll be December, and we're going to be getting all happy and jolly. But until then, thank you very, very much for listening. I've been your host, Luke the Human. You've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye, guys.